Biology 1, this is your reminder video for the two processes in which living organisms use to make energy, and that is going to be photosynthesis and cellular respiration. We're going to start with photosynthesis, which is the process in which plants take energy from the sun, or solar energy or radiant energy from the sun, and they use that energy to make what we call chemical energy, adenosine triphosphate, or what we know as ATP. And we're going to start with how photosynthesis actually works. Photosynthesis has something called reactants, and it has something called products. You're usually going to see this in a formula, and on the left-hand side of the formula or arrow, you're going to see that carbon dioxide and water are combining. They are coming together, and then they come together to make what is called glucose and oxygen. And glucose and oxygen are going to be the products, what we get out of photosynthesis. But the main part of that process that we're going to be getting out of it is energy, and that energy is going to be ATP. One of the things that you need to be mindful of as it relates to photosynthesis is the fact that when carbon dioxide and water come together, they're coming together in the leaf of a plant. That is where photosynthesis actually takes place. It takes place in the leaves of plants. And in particular, in the leaves of plants, we're going to find our plant cells. And within our plant cells, we're going to find an organelle called the chloroplast. Now, the chloroplast is the site of photosynthesis. It's where photosynthesis happens, goes down, or takes place. And the chloroplast contains a specific kind of pigment, and that pigment is called chlorophyll. Chlorophyll is the pigment that is found in the chloroplast. It gives the chloroplast that green kind of hue or color, which makes leaves look green. It attracts the sunlight. It attracts the radiant energy from the sun that we are converting into chemical energy. And all of this is happening in the leaf of the plant. One of the other things that you need to be mindful of is that our leaves contain some structures in it that help in the process of photosynthesis. And that structure is called the stomata. The stomata has two parts. It has a tiny porous opening that we call the stoma, which is responsible for gas exchange. It's where carbon dioxide and oxygen are able to leave or enter the plant, as well as it's surrounded by something called guard cells. And these guard cells actually close and open for the purposes of water retention, and they typically close at night to retain the water in the plant or keep the plants from losing too much water. But how does water get to the leaf of a plant for photosynthesis to take place? The way that it gets to the leaf of the plant is by way of the roots. So water travels from the soil into the roots and makes its way up the vascular tissue that we call xylem, and it travels up the xylem and makes its way to the leaves of the plants by that vascular tissue. And so what happens is once the water reaches the leaf of the plant and combines with the carbon dioxide, which are the reactants for photosynthesis, we can get the production of what we call glucose. And glucose is the sugar that is made by plants through photosynthesis. And then we also get the release of oxygen. Oxygen is the gas that is produced or released on photosynthesis. And so the glucose, where does it go? It goes to a vascular tissue that we call phloem, which is the vascular tissue that stores the sugar or stores the glucose, while the oxygen is being released by way of the structure that is responsible for gas exchange, and that is going to be the stoma. And so that kind of wraps up what you need to understand about photosynthesis. There are a couple other things that you need to be aware of related to photosynthesis, and that's going to be that plants act as a filtration system, and a filtration system for what? For gases within our atmosphere. And so what happens is photosynthesis is important for what happens in our atmosphere because it removes or reduces or decreases the amount of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. So photosynthesis is responsible for that because plants are absorbing or taking in the carbon dioxide to make our glucose and to make the oxygen that is produced by plants. So not only is carbon dioxide being removed from the atmosphere, but it's also filtrating oxygen into the atmosphere, meaning that photosynthesis is the way that oxygen is released into the atmosphere. So plants are really important when it comes to what gases are in our actual atmosphere or that are around us. And so photosynthesis makes it so that we can keep the right amounts of carbon dioxide in our atmosphere, but out of our atmosphere, but also that we can keep the right amount of oxygen in our atmosphere. So anytime you cut trees down, anytime an area experiences what we call deforestation, you're going to see increased amounts of carbon dioxide in that area, and you're going to see a decreased amount of oxygen in that area. So what happens in turn is that there's a decreased amount of carbon dioxide being removed, while also there is a decreased amount of oxygen being added. And so trees and plants are really important for living in our atmosphere, and it makes for a healthy atmosphere, makes for a healthy animals and people and plants. And so with that being in mind, we're going to go ahead on and move to our understanding of cellular respiration. Cellular respiration is the other process in which living organisms can make energy, and there are two types of cellular respiration. There's anaerobic respiration and aerobic respiration. And it's going to be in aerobic respiration where energy is made in the mitochondria. Energy is made in the mitochondria by way of aerobic respiration, and it requires oxygen. Oxygen is involved in aerobic respiration. It's the most efficient kind of cellular respiration, which means that we're going to get 36 to 38 ATPs in aerobic respiration, which means that it's the most efficient form of cellular respiration and making the mitochondria the powerhouse of the cell. It is the amount of ATP, which is 36 to 38, that's making the mitochondria the powerhouse of cells. And so a lot of times, aerobic respiration is used interchangeably with cellular respiration. Now, I believe that's a mistake by scientists because there are two types of cellular respiration, and aerobic respiration isn't the only one, but often it's used interchangeably. So if you see it on your exam or if you see it on a quiz, on an assessment, and it's saying cellular respiration, most of the time they're referring to aerobic respiration. So aerobic respiration happens in the mitochondria. You're going to get 36 to 38 ATPs, and it is the most efficient way to get energy in a cell. The other type of cellular respiration that we need to be familiar with is going to be anaerobic respiration. Anaerobic respiration always happens in the cytoplasm, and you're not going to get that much energy out of it. It's going to be the least efficient way to get energy, and you're going to get about 2 ATPs out of that process. It happens in the cytoplasm, and there are 2 types of anaerobic respiration, and that's going to be lactic acid fermentation, and it's going to be alcohol fermentation. So often anaerobic respiration is used interchangeably with fermentation. So if you see a reference to fermentation, you know that we're talking about anaerobic respiration. Anaerobic respiration always happens in the cytoplasm, and it always is going to produce 2 ATPs, and it happens without oxygen. So while aerobic respiration requires oxygen, anaerobic respiration does not require oxygen. And so what happens in anaerobic respiration, in your 2 types, you're going to have lactic acid fermentation. And then that's the kind of fermentation that a lot of times happens in muscles. It's the reason our muscles get tired. It's the reason why we experience what we call cramps. So if you've ever caught a Charlie horse or cramp in your leg, that's because of lactic acid fermentation. It's because that lactic acid produced by anaerobic respiration in your muscles is building up, and as a result you feel the burn, you feel the cramp, and so it's going to be lactic acid fermentation that causes that. The other form is alcohol fermentation. It's how we get the beers and wines and all those things, recreational alcohol. It's how we get that. We get it through alcohol fermentation. And so what happens is the process happens without oxygen. Oftentimes, an organism that is usually added to help with this process is called yeast. And so if you place yeast in apple juice, or you place it in grape juice, or if you place it in any other forms of juice, what's going to happen is that the yeast is going to release gases that allow for us to produce what we call recreational alcohol. And so we get beer and wine from that. And so oftentimes when you see the bubbles at the top of a glass, when someone has poured a glass of wine or a glass of beer, it's being carbon dioxide is being produced. You're seeing an increased amount of carbon dioxide gas being released, and as a result you get those bubbles at the top of the actual glass. The other thing that you need to be mindful of as it relates to cellular respiration is that plants go through cellular respiration and animal cells go through cellular respiration. So remember when I talked about how the stoma, or the stomata, that structure in leaves, is responsible for gas exchange? It is not only plants are not only going through photosynthesis and releasing oxygen. Plants are also releasing carbon dioxide, because plants also go through cellular respiration. So while animal cells only go through cellular respiration, plants go through both photosynthesis and cellular respiration. So when you talk about cellular respiration, you need to know that plants go through both cellular respiration and photosynthesis, while animal cells go through cellular respiration only. The other thing that you need to be mindful of is that photosynthesis and cellular respiration are a part of a cycle, which means that the products of photosynthesis feed into cellular respiration, and the products of cellular respiration feed into photosynthesis. This ends and concludes our lesson on photosynthesis and cellular respiration. For any questions, contact Ms. Piper. Thank you.